to the next in our series of fireside chats, and I'm delighted to be joined today by the Reverend Tracy Lauersen, who is the rector of Warragul Anglican Church and our preacher for the pre-recorded Eucharist for the 20th Sunday after Pentecost at St Paul's Cathedral a little earlier. Thanks, Tracy, for your ministry to us today and for finding some time to have a chat.
Well, thank you for asking me. It's a great privilege.
Yeah. Tracy, in your sermon, you drew a wonderful connection between believing and then going on to grow into the experience of God's presence. And I just wanted to tease that out with you a little bit and to talk perhaps about how sometimes we have to submit to the stories of the scriptures and their account of Israel's experience and the early church's experience and kind of join ourselves to that faith tradition in order to then grow into a more personal experience of faith and awareness of God's presence. Is that a fair?
Yeah. Yes, I think it's they're both critical elements on the journey of faith. I think we get very caught up on beliefs.
Yeah.
You know, they tend to be the things that divide us. They also tend to be the way we characterise. Like Christians are known for what they believe, and we recite the Apostles' Creed, and we're very, very much known for our position on things.
Yeah.
But that is only one part of what we would say was the ideal life. The ideal life isn't just working out what you think is truth.
Yeah.
The ideal life is a life that has the companionship of God. And so, the ideal life is not to move from unbelief to belief, but rather from separation from God to union with God. And belief is part of that process. And I felt really challenged as I was preparing this sermon because as an evangelical Christian, we're very strong on what we believe. Our bookcases are lined with like 12 essential gospel truths that we must never forget. And here I stand, I can do no other. And so we get very caught up on things like that. But we mustn't. We must recognise that our beliefs are just one half of what we would say is our relationship with God.
I like
the foundation. But not the blossoming, like the blossoming into him walking with God on a daily basis. Yeah.
So perhaps it's a bit like moving beyond what's purely kind of cognitive or propositional into a more experiential kind of relationship with God. But belief is a necessary part of that and a stage in that process.
And perhaps also culture is helping us to appreciate that. Like when I became a Christian as a young adult, in the late 80s, it was a very cognitive experience.
Yes.
And about becoming convinced about the truths of the Christian claim.
Yes, intellectual assent.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
Whereas I understand that the millennials in our culture are much keener, on believing something because they can see it works. It is a little bit more in that experience space.
Yes.
Both are important.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're right, we can get too stuck on one. The other thing that struck me in your homily was the piece around holiness as distinctiveness, Israel being set apart to bear witness to God's transcendent otherness. That's a mark of God's holiness, God's absolute otherness, as it were. And of course, Israel's really suffered for that in its history, hasn't it, for being so distinctively other, and that understanding of what it means to be holy, to be set apart. Do you think in the modern West, the Christian churches have been sufficiently distinctive? Have we had that kind of mark of holiness, do you think, as part of our life and mission?
Probably not. If it were the case that we had that distinctiveness, then we probably wouldn't have to say to ourselves, how is it that I can wear my faith on my sleeve a bit more in the workplace or in our community? If we were truly distinctive, we wouldn't have to ask ourselves those questions. And there is a criticism that the church, that Christians have assimilated too much to our culture around us. It's a challenge for every generation to work out how the gospel should be lived out and which things we ought to, which things we can happily assimilate into, and which areas where we need to be distinctive.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's helpful, and of course the wonderful mystery of the Christian tradition, the Christian experience, is that God's transcendent otherness is kind of matched by God's imminent closeness in the incarnation, especially for us, as you touched on. But also I think God's closeness, God's nearness to God's people Israel. So it's holding that otherness and transcendence and holiness in tension with God's intimate kind of presence and nearness, isn't it? That's the kind of mystery of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I love the mystery that's in the John 14 passage around Jesus saying, if you love me, like the Father and I will come and live with you, dwell with you.
Beautiful image.
Beautiful, Yeah, all of those New Testament images around what it means to be the church relate to like very familiar things, like son and daughter, sister, family, bride of Christ. Yeah, they're all very intimate and family-oriented metaphors for us to think about. Domestic.
Images. Yeah. Tracy, I think you and I started around the same time in Gippsland, and you came from a very busy parish in metropolitan Melbourne to Warragul. How's that transition been for you? Warragul, of course, is in that eastern growth corridor out of Melbourne. So, but it is still a significant transition from a metropolitan area to a regional ministry. How's that been for you and your family, and what are some of the things that you've observed in that process?
In terms of for ministry, I really enjoyed when I started being able to think about where's the parish. The parish is very clear in the country.
Yes.
Like Warragul, okay, this is Warragul, and it's got 16,000 people, and this is our mission. This is the area of our ministry. This is our little patch. I think it's a lot harder in the city because people drive all over the place to go to church, and because in our suburb in Kew, I think there were 4 Anglican churches. So working out exactly how to live out your mission as a church. So coming to the country, I just thought, this is great, this is a lot easier. Also, I appreciated coming from a big diocese, and I'd been on Bishop's Council there for many years, that a large organisation actually finds it very hard to adapt to change because it's so big, and even the smallest change actually has a lot of impacts. And it felt to me at first, I thought Gippsland is like the diocese that can. It's like the little diocese that can, because it's not that big, so it can actually, it has the capacity to adapt to change, perhaps. Okay, we don't want to go too far.
I hope so.
I mean, as a family, I felt a little bit of a fraud saying we'd moved to the country, because really it's just at the end of the freeway. It's just inside the diocese. It's just 1 hour and you're popping out on the end of Kingsway. It's very easy to get up to Melbourne. So I think Warragul has that mixed identity of it's a regional town, it's country, but it's also a sleeper suburb for some who work in the city. And there's quite a few people in our congregation who spend some of the time in the parish, if you like, and some of the time in the city with their work and so on.
Fantastic. And during COVID, of course, I guess that commuting's been truncated a fair bit, and one of the ways that you've responded, Tracy, with your people to the challenges of this year is to be an early adopter of the online kind of platform, and you were tremendous, I think, in the early days of COVID, especially in putting those services together and sharing them with the diocese through the website, an Eastertide, which was a wonderful ministry. You kept on with that. How's that been received, the kind of online offerings from your parish, and what do you think the opportunities are for us, both in terms of your context, but also more broadly for the church as we move out of COVID.
Well, I should say at the start of this that I knew nothing about creating videos. Like we weren't streaming our services online before this happened. The only thing we were able to start with was we had a decent website that we knew could be a vehicle for doing some kind of ministry online. So that was really helpful. They've been received really well. I mean, everyone would prefer to meet in person.
Yes.
But I've been wondering about whether we should sort of have something to do with pajama party or something at some point, because one of the joys about online ministry is that people can of course sit in their lounge rooms with their dressing gown on and just click so look, it's been received well. I'm sure that there have been people throughout the world who have disengaged from church at this time because it's just it's not there in the way it used to be. But in God's providence, I think what the internet's enabled us to do is truly amazing. And just like in the first century, the gospel spread because of the peace of Rome and their wonderful road network. It feels like in COVID-19 that the church has been able to continue and to flourish in different ways because of the tool of the internet. And for a long time too, we've been I've certainly been complaining to God that I would like more unbelievers to walk through the church doors, and it actually takes a lot of courage for someone to walk through a church door. We're such we're a subculture, and people are worried about what they wear, and they'll say the wrong thing, or they'll pop up at the wrong time or something. Whereas it's very easy to just click the TV on and watch a service on YouTube. So I feel like we've been able to share our message with a much broader group of people. It feels like God has said, well, here's your mission field. I'm just taking you out there in the easiest possible way.
And it's as you say, it's that soft threshold, isn't it? It's not a hard threshold to cross. It's a soft point of entry for people, and they can kind of have a little look from outside through the window, as it were.
So we have people. We have people watching. I think YouTube tells me that something like 15 to 20% of our viewers are overseas.
Yeah, wow.
And we know that some of them have connections to people in the church. We've got people in the church who've got family in upstate New York. We've got others who have relatives in Ireland that are watching. But recently I got a message from someone in Nairobi.
Wow.
So I thought this is quite incredible.
Global ministry.
Yeah, well, but small, very small, but still very exciting.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And how do we, given that we probably also reached some people, who are closer to us through this medium, how do we kind of build on those connections? How do we invite those people who might have put their toe in the water to become part of the life of the community, and hopefully the worshipping life of the community in the fullness of time? It's hard, isn't it? Because because of that soft point of connection, in a sense, how do we make sure we build the relationship?
Well, hopefully some locals who've seen something online will come once we open our doors, but it may be the case that this may be the way that some people engage with God through watching a service. So we have to adapt to that, and the experts say to us that we need to move from putting on a show, presenting a video. We need to move to engaging people, and engaging people is really hard. And I feel like what our church has been able to do is that first part, but the engagement will require us to think about lots of different ways. Like I heard about one church that on I think Monday or Tuesday after the sermon, the minister has a Zoom, sort of a 30-minute little Zoom discussion with people about the sermon. So they're trying to sort of like engage people every day of the week in some way, a different way. And so there's lots of things you can do. There's on our websites you can have chat functions and things like this, but the vast majority of people don't want to chat, and if they're using their TV set, it's actually tricky to type. They're not on a laptop to type something. So the way in which to engage people will unfold.
Yeah.
But I think we'd be wrong to think this isn't an opportunity that we should invest in. We should actually make more of this.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree with that. It's a bit of a silver lining in some ways, and it's brought forward perhaps some conversations that we needed to have in any case about our means of engagement. So, yeah. Tracy, you mentioned before that you became a Christian, I think, as a young adult. Tell us a little bit about that process for you, and how from there you found yourself responding to a call to ordain ministry.
Yeah, well, I was a young adult. I had gone to church a bit as a teenager, but I just, I was one of those teenagers that kind of like flowed in and out, through my teenage years. My family was, my mother would have described herself as an agnostic and my dad as an atheist.
Yeah, right.
So therefore, when I did become a Christian, which was through a wonderful school friend who I got to know, she was at my school, but she was also in the church youth group. And even when I sort of didn't go back to church for a few years, she was still a good friend and just was constantly inviting me to stuff. She's kind of the model where I just say, just keep inviting people, okay? To the person you're inviting who says no, they've forgotten it 10 minutes later, whereas Christians, we sort of go, oh, they've rejected me. Right?
That's right, I can't ask them again.
I can't ask them again. But she just kept asking, and once she asked me to this Christian rally, Katoomba Convention, if you remember, which were magnificent occasions, and I heard a preacher preach on Psalm 51, David's Psalm of Repentance, and it was just this penny-dropping moment where I thought, realised that what God was offering in forgiveness and a fresh start in Jesus Christ, and that to walk away from that opportunity was a decision in itself. So that was the moment in which I did accept God's offer of forgiveness and a new life. But because I was a young adult and because of my family background, I remember thinking quite early on, I read in 1 Peter the verse that says, "Be holy, for I am holy." And I thought, I hardly know this holy God that I've committed my life to. And that same week, I think I came across a magazine, a Christian magazine that had listed all the Bible colleges in Australasia, and this must be the Holy Spirit put in an idea in my mind that I could go to Bible college.
Wow.
So I went off to Bible college really as a young Christian, about a year later after saving up a bit of money. And
just for your own sake, in a sense.
I went for my own sake. I went for my own sake to do a 2-year diploma. Got talked into then doing a 3-year bachelor degree by the principal there. And it was during that time and through that process of I was on leave without pay for 2 years, the first 2 years of my study, and then it was a very significant decision to, am I actually going to formally resign and continue to study the scriptures, and I felt at the time like, well, if God could use me, I would much prefer to use whatever gifts he's given me for the building up of his church rather than to go back to my job, which was a fantastic job, but that was kind of like the starting point. The end point was a good 10 years later, I would say.
Yeah, sure.
I think they say for a woman that, when someone says to us, have you ever thought about ministry? We'll just go, oh, they can't be serious, not me. We tend to respond like that. We need a lot of encouragement to actually think about it seriously and start to respond to what God might be calling us to.
Yeah, wow, that's a lovely story. It's a kind of enacted parable almost of your sermon, in a sense, that journey from belief into the actual lived experience of relationship with the living God. It's wonderful. And now you're doing a PhD.
I doctor of ministry.
Doctor of ministry.
At Pasadena.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
At Fuller Seminary. Yeah, I'm really enjoying that. I'm doing a subject at the moment on trauma and ministering to people who've experienced trauma. It's great.
Yeah. And Tracy, speaking of that, one of the other hats you wear is a long-standing member of General Synod at the Anglican Church of Australia, and in particular as chair of the working group on family violence, as part of General Synod's work. Tell us a little bit about that ministry and why you think it's important that the church is active in that space.
Yes. So at the last General Synod, the Synod, I think it was unanimously resolved to ask the Standing Committee to see what was possible in terms of researching family violence within our faith communities and its nature and really how we could best minister to people who might be experiencing family violence. And of course, the broader society has made us aware that this is a significant problem throughout our culture, and the church is not immune. We know that the church is not immune to problems. But not only that, we also know that family violence is experienced differently in different communities. So if you're an Indigenous person, or you're a person from a culturally and linguistically diverse background of some kind, or you're a disabled person, we know that these groups of people actually experience violence differently, that there are different stresses that lead to violence and so on. But we don't know much about what those stresses might be and what the nature of violence might be in our faith communities. There just has been not much research done. So really we're doing research in order to find out, how this is experienced and what we are doing as a church that is helpful or unhelpful, so that we can actually better minister. It's scary. It's scary because I think for a long time, like everyone in broader society as well, we've wanted to say, oh, that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in our family or our community, or it doesn't happen in the church. But we know it does. The statistics are just really something that we must, it pushes us to need to study it. So we're into the third stage of the research now. And if people can have a look at the Diocese of Gippsland website, there'll be a link there inviting people who have had an experience of family violence and some connection with the Anglican Church, either presently or maybe they used to go to church, to participate in a survey, an anonymous survey. So the link will be on the website.
And that's something, Tracy, that you'd encourage anyone watching to get involved in, or to refer to it, someone they know, and it's anonymous. And
yes, you might know someone. You might know someone who has been impacted by family violence. They might not be going to church anymore, but can you share that link with them? Because this is actually the group. We've studied our clergy and leaders in our church and so on, and broader society. We've done a sort of study out there as well. But finding people who've been impacted by family violence is actually much harder to find. So we really need everyone to be passing on this link to people.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, it's a really important project, and sometimes just being able to name the problem, is the first step, isn't it, in terms of changing our practice and how we might address it.
Yeah, that's right. Bringing it out into the open and talking about it starts the healing process. And
it sounds like that will feed nicely into work too, and that the two will perhaps inform each other in terms of what ministering to people who've experienced significant trauma.
Yes, we'll see. I'm not quite up to that stage.
early days. Well, we wish you well on that journey, Tracy, and it's wonderful that you're here in Gippsland, and we really value the connections that you bring with the work of the wider church also, and the wonderful work that you're doing locally in Warragul. And thank you again for your ministry to us today through your preaching, and it's been really lovely to spend some time getting to know you a little more.
Thank you. You're very kind.
Thanks for everyone, and we'll see you next time.